The mail had been light that afternoon, a utility bill, a flyer for gutter cleaning, and then the thick, cream-colored envelope that immediately stood out against the rest. My name, Ms. Rowena Calder, was written in swirling gold script. The return address was in San Francisco, the city where my son Ethan now lived. I smiled before I even opened it. Ethan's wedding invitation. I imagined it would say something like, "With joy in our hearts, we invite you to celebrate," and maybe even mother of the groom printed proudly by my name. But when I slid the heavy card out, my smile faltered. There it was. All the flourishes and elegant fonts I'd expected, except my name, sat alone on the second line under guest. Not mom, not mother of the groom, just guest. I sat at my small kitchen table, my hands tightening on the card. Surely it was a mistake. Some printing oversight. I set the invitation down, inhaled slowly, and slid it back into the envelope, intending to call Ethan later to laugh about the mix-up. That's when something else slipped free, a glossy sheet of paper that fluttered onto the table. At first I thought it was another insert for the wedding, but when I turned it over, my breath caught. It was a bill from a high-end restaurant in San Francisco, totaled just over $300. The date was a month ago. At the bottom, in blue ink, someone had scrawled, "Paid by Mom," followed by a little smiley face. I stared at the handwriting. It wasn't Ethan's neat print, but I couldn't place it. My mind flicked through possibilities, a mistake from the restaurant, some kind of inside joke I wasn't in on, or maybe a message meant for me. The smell of my chamomile tea, long forgotten on the counter, curled into the air as I sat motionless. The pale blue lake outside my window shimmered in the afternoon light, but my focus stayed on that bill. I slipped it back into the envelope, tucked the whole thing into the drawer beside my refrigerator, and closed it slowly, as though shutting a lid on a thought I wasn't ready to finish. Then I reached for my phone to call Mabel. The drive up the winding road to the vineyard had been beautiful, the kind of scenery you'd expect on a postcard, rolling green hills, endless rows of grapevines, sunlight draping everything in gold. But as the entrance gates opened, and I saw the lineup of gleaming luxury cars waiting for valet service, something inside me tightened. My sensible sedan felt like it didn't belong in the frame. I stepped out, smoothing the pale blue gown I'd splurged on weeks ago. A purchase that made me wince, but also made me feel prepared. A young man in a crisp uniform opened my door without making eye contact, already scanning the next arrival. Inside the reception courtyard, waiters in black vests offered champagne flutes before you could even find your footing. To the left, a sign pointed toward a VIP family lounge. I hesitated, wondering if that was where I should go. But before I could move, a slim woman with a clipboard appeared in front of me. "Bride's side or groom's?" she asked, her tone brisk. "Efficient. Groom's," I said, smiling. She returned a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, checked a box on her list, and stepped aside. No offer to guide me anywhere. Scanning the crowd, I spotted Ethan across the courtyard, a champagne glass in one hand, his other resting casually in his pocket as he laughed with Marissa's parents. My heart lifted, and I raised a hand to wave. He didn't notice. I walked toward him, weaving through clusters of guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses. When I reached his group, he glanced at me briefly, his smile shifting into something tighter. "Hi, Mom," he said, leaning in for a quick kiss on my cheek before turning back to Marissa's father, who was telling some story about an investment trip to Dubai. Ethan laughed at the punchline, already absorbed again. I stood there for a moment, hands folded over my clutch, feeling like an extra in a scene that didn't need me. When the conversation shifted to people I'd never met, I stepped back, letting the space between us widen. The sound of clinking glasses and polished laughter swirled around me as I drifted toward the edge of the courtyard, wondering when I'd stopped being part of his center. The ushers began moving through the courtyard, guiding guests toward the rows of white chairs set out for the ceremony. I followed the gentle stream of people, holding my small clutch close, the air thick with perfume and the rustle of silk. When my turn came, the young man at the end of the aisle glanced at his list, then motioned me toward a row near the very back, right beside the service entrance, where staff in black aprons slipped in and out, carrying trays. "Excuse me," I said quietly, leaning toward him. "I'm the groom's mother. Shouldn't I—" Before I could finish, Ethan's voice cut through from behind me. "Not today." "You're not." The words landed sharp, even sharper than his tone. I turned, startled. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed past me toward Marissa's family at the front. There was something quick and deliberate in the way his gaze flicked to them and back to me, as if he'd just delivered a signal I wasn't meant to miss. I swallowed hard, my pulse suddenly in my ears. "Ethan, I don't understand." He didn't respond. Instead, he gave a stiff nod to the usher and moved past, his hand already at Marissa's elbow as she joined him. The usher shifted uncomfortably and gestured again to the empty chair in the back row. My cheeks burned as I sat down, the legs of the chair sinking slightly into the soft grass. From somewhere behind me, a young voice whispered, low but not low enough, "Guess she didn't make the cut for the real family section." A few muffled chuckles followed, quickly masked by the swelling strings of the quartet. I kept my eyes forward, spine straight, hands folded neatly in my lap. I told myself I would not move. I would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. As the bridal party began their slow walk down the aisle, the scent of gardenias drifted past on the breeze, but I barely noticed. My gaze stayed fixed, not on the couple at the front, but on the rows between us, each one a reminder of how far I'd just been pushed. The ceremony unfolded in the distance, a haze of white chiffon, vows I could barely hear, and the occasional murmur of guests shifting in their seats. I clapped at the right moments, smiled when others smiled. But inside, my mind had wandered far from the rows of chairs and floral arches. I thought of the years that had led to this day, the evenings I'd come home bone-tired from the library, but still stayed up grading Ethan's essays. The weekends I'd worked extra hours at the circulation desk to afford his field trips. The rainy nights I'd skipped dinner so he could have the last portion of stew, and later, when he was older, the quiet choices that cost me selling my engagement ring to help with his tuition, draining my modest savings to seed his first business idea. Marissa had entered the picture during the early growth of Ethan's company. She was charming, always impeccably dressed, her smile like sunlight in a crowded room. Yet her compliments to me often carried a faint aftertaste. "You're so authentic." "Rowena," she'd say, before adding something about fitting in or presenting the right image in their new social circle. I'd brushed it off, not wanting to imagine she meant anything unkind. After the ceremony, I wandered toward the bar, thinking perhaps a glass of water might settle the knot in my chest. I stood near a hedge, half shielded from the crowd. When Marissa's voice floated over, she was speaking to one of her bridesmaids, her tone light, almost conspiratorial. "It's better if she keeps a low profile," Marissa said, the clink of her champagne glass punctuating the words. "We planned for it just in case she didn't fit the vibe." The bridesmaid laughed softly, replying something I didn't catch. I felt the chill before I processed the words fully. The seating, the clipped smiles, The polite distance, none of it had been coincidence. It was deliberate, designed to shrink me until I disappeared. I stepped back from the hedge, the glass of water untouched in my hand, and began scanning the crowd with new eyes. The reception hall shimmered with candlelight and soft music. Every table set with crystal glassware and towering arrangements of white orchids. I walked slowly between the rows, scanning for my name among the place cards. Certain I'd find it near the front, with Ethan's side of the family. Row after row. There was nothing. Finally, I approached a young staff member adjusting silverware at an empty table. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice even. "Could you help me find my seat? I'm the groom's mother." He froze, glanced toward another waiter, then back at me. "We were told you'd make other arrangements." His voice dipped at the end, as though hoping I wouldn't ask more. I straightened. "Other arrangements?" He shifted uncomfortably, murmured something about checking with the planner, and hurried off. I didn't wait for him to return. I spotted Ethan across the room, speaking with two of Marissa's uncles. I made my way over, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses muffling my own heartbeat. "Ethan," I began, stepping into his line of sight. "There's no seat for me." He gave a small sigh, the kind you'd use with someone who'd forgotten a simple instruction. "Mom, we agreed you'd head back after the ceremony." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "We never agreed to that." He glanced around, eyes catching on the guests nearby who had gone quiet. "Just don't make this harder," he muttered. And without waiting for my reply, he turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, aware of the sideways glances, the whispered exchanges just beyond my hearing. Then I smoothed the front of my gown, lifted my chin, and moved toward the edge of the room, where the shadows of the garden pressed against the glass doors. From there, I could watch the tables fill, the servers pour wine, and the empty space where my place should have been. I slipped out through the side doors into the vineyard garden, the muted hum of the reception fading behind me. Out here, the air felt cooler, the smell of ripe grapes mingling with the faint sweetness of the floral centerpieces drifting from inside. I walked along the path, trying to quiet the pounding in my head. Near a cluster of roses, two groomsmen leaned against the railing, drinks in hand, voices low but not low enough. "Can you believe Ethan pulled this off without spending a dime?" One of them laughed. "All thanks to a generous family contribution," the other chuckled. "Must be nice having someone cover the bill and still take the credit." I froze where I stood, their words sinking in like stones. My mind began assembling pieces I hadn't realized were part of the same puzzle. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I pulled it from my clutch. I opened my banking app, my breath catching when the numbers appeared. My savings account, the one I'd guarded for years, was down by $45,000. I could see it now, as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. Ethan at my kitchen table months ago, smiling as he stirred sugar into his coffee. "It's just temporary. Mom," he'd said, "if I can hold some of your funds for a few weeks, it'll give me more investment flexibility. I'll put it right back." His tone had been so casual, so reassuring, that I hadn't pressed. I thought I was helping him bridge a business deal. I hadn't imagined the bridge was leading straight to this vineyard, to those orchids, to that champagne fountain. I stared at the glowing screen, the missing amount blurring as my grip tightened. My own son had taken nearly everything I'd saved over a lifetime and used it to fund a celebration where I wasn't even welcome at the table. Inside, the music swelled, glasses clinked, and laughter spilled out into the night. I turned toward the building, the cool evening air bracing against my skin, and felt something inside me harden into resolve. I knew I could walk back in, find Ethan, and let my anger pour out in front of everyone. But that would give them the scene they'd expect from someone they'd already decided didn't belong. Instead, I took the other path, the one that required steady hands and a colder kind of precision. I stepped farther into the shadows of the garden and dialed my bank. My voice was calm as I verified my identity and explained the situation. The representative pulled up my account, confirming the transfers and, more importantly, that several payments were still pending. I want them frozen immediately, I said. Within minutes, the largest charges, the ones that hadn't yet cleared, were locked. The banker assured me any completed transactions could still be disputed, but these would stop before a single champagne flute was poured on my dime. From there, I pulled up the emailed receipts Ethan had forwarded months ago, pretending they were business-related. The names of the vendors were all right there. I began dialing each one, the caterer first, then the florist, then the band. With each call, my tone was measured and professional. I explained that due to a personal matter, I was withdrawing financial support and that all outstanding invoices should be sent directly to the groom, Ethan Calder. I apologized for the inconvenience, but not for my decision. By the time I walked back inside, my pulse had steadied. I found a quiet corner in a side lounge, just far enough from the reception hall to see without being seen. It didn't take long. 2 servers passed through the doorway. Speaking in low tones to the wedding planner, she paused mid-conversation, glanced toward the head table, and began flipping through her clipboard with tight, jerky movements. From my seat, I crossed one leg over the other, resting my hands lightly on my clutch. I could feel the faint tremor in my fingertips, not from fear, but from the knowledge that the first threads had been cut and the fabric would not hold for long. It started small, a subtle shift in the air, the kind only those watching closely could catch. The band, midway through a lively set, trailed off into an awkward silence. Conversations faltered as the musicians stepped down, one of them leaning toward the wedding planner with a pointed expression. Then the caterer appeared near the head table, arms crossed, speaking in clipped tones to Ethan. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the tension tighten his jaw, the way his shoulders drew in. A ripple of murmurs moved through the guests, curiosity mixing with discomfort. And then Ethan was striding toward me, cutting across the polished floor like a man with nowhere else to put his fury. "What did you do?" he hissed, his face close enough that I could see the flush rising in his cheeks. I rose slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I paid for my place here, since my money isn't good enough for the front row. It's not good enough for your party." His mouth opened, but before he could answer, Marissa's mother appeared at his side, her expression taut. "Is this true?" she asked him, but her gaze was locked on me. Marissa wasn't far behind, her voice sharp and brittle. "You've been planning this from the start, haven't you? You just couldn't stand to let us have our day." I felt a strange calm as I reached for my vintage clutch. "Enjoy what's left," I said evenly. "If you can." Gasps rose from a nearby table, and a few heads turned away quickly, pretending not to watch. Ethan's hand twitched at his side as if he might grab my arm, but he didn't. I walked past them, the click of my heels punctuating the sudden lull in the music, and stepped toward the glass doors that led out into the night. The noise behind me shifted, voices raised, the planner's pen tapping against her clipboard. The faint beginnings of an argument that was about to spread. The cool air met me like an old friend as I crossed the threshold, the chaos inside fading into a muffled hum. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as I walked down the candle-lit drive, each step carrying me farther from the musicless reception hall. Behind me, the sounds of raised voices faded into the night, replaced by the soft hum of the crickets in the vines. I kept my head high, even as a few late arrivals passed in the opposite direction, their eyes darting between me and the glow spilling from the building. Near the end of the drive, I passed a pair of guests huddled under a pergola, whispering urgently into their phones. One glanced up as I walked by, then quickly looked away, the way people do when they've just heard the gossip and aren't sure if it's safe to speak it aloud. At the main gate, I pulled out my phone and ordered a car. While I waited, I stood still, letting the cool breeze press against my face. The driver pulled up in a modest sedan, and without a word, I slid into the back seat. The ride to the small inn where I was staying felt like a deep exhale. The driver didn't try to make conversation, and I was grateful for the silence. When we pulled up to the ivy-covered front, I thanked him quietly and went inside. In my room, I didn't bother taking off my gown right away. I set my clutch on the desk, opened my laptop, and booked the first flight home in the morning. Then I powered down my phone, silencing the flood of calls and messages I knew were waiting. I moved to the window and sat in the chair beside it, the flickering vineyard lights in the distance drawing my gaze. I thought of today, yes, but also of the years before the bending, the quiet swallowing of hurt, the endless effort to keep peace in a relationship that asked for my dignity as payment. The night outside was still. For the first time in a long time, so was I. Weeks later, the winter rains had returned to the lake, rippling its surface in soft silver rings. From the window of my cottage, I could see the water's edge, calm and certain. As I signed the final paperwork from my attorney, the bank dispute had closed in my favor, most of my funds restored, and with a steady hand. I updated my will. Ethan's name no longer appeared. The balance would go to the Regional Literacy Foundation, earmarked for small-town libraries like the one where I'd spent most of my working life. It was less about punishment than clarity. My money, my effort, my legacy would no longer be currency for someone else's image. In the weeks that followed, friends seemed to appear in every corner of my life. Mabel came by with a homemade pie, unannounced as always. The Thursday book club began meeting in my living room, their chatter a welcome sound. I restarted the memoir writing group for seniors, the one I'd put on hold years ago when Ethan's needs seemed to swallow all my spare time. One crisp Saturday, I read a human interest story in the local paper, Mystery Donor Saves Town Library from closure. Only a handful of people knew it was me, and that was enough. The satisfaction wasn't in the recognition, but in knowing that my choices were building something real. Late one evening, as I tidied the kitchen, the mail slot clinked. Inside was a single envelope addressed in Ethan's handwriting. I opened it to find one sentence I wish you'd handled it differently. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and slid it into the desk drawer without reply. Then I filled the kettle, letting the quiet hum of the burner fill the room. As I poured my tea, I felt a small smile settle over me, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped paying for my own erasure. The vineyard had tried to seat me in the shadows. Now, I was writing my own guest list, and the only requirement for entry was respect.